Hey Ecofictologists, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lovis, and today I have a very special guest with me. This is Katrina, and she is one of the teenage winners of the XR Wordsmiths Solarpunk Showcase short story writing competition that she took part in. It's quite a mouthful. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm from Jersey City in New Jersey, USA, and I'm 16. I'm really excited to be here and talk about my story and talk about solarpunk in general because it's a really cool genre.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we'll go right into it. You actually submitted two stories.
I did.
Both of them, I loved them so much. It was so difficult to choose between them. Do you want to know spoilers? Because we do still want everybody to have the full experience when they go up on the website, but do you want to give us a short summary of both of them?
So the one that actually won, the city Starlight, is about like sort of a futuristic city and like just my idea of what the what the perfect like amazing city could be if environment was combined with human happiness and like how cool that could be, and all the different like cutting edge urban planning things, and like a love story set in that city. And yeah, that's basically the gist. You can read it for yourself. The second one is about a cemetery that's also an old growth forest, and like I thought that was just a cool combination of land use and just a cool idea. And it's about the caretaker of the forest and his personal story. And so yeah, those are my two stories.
Yeah, they were so wonderful, and they were quite different in terms of scale. Like you said, one of them focuses very on kind of a small local scale on this cemetery old growth forest, and the other one gives you paints you a whole picture of an entire city, right? So I really love that you like zoomed in and then zoomed out, and both stories had that kind of romantic vein running through them, right? Do you read a lot of romance stories?
Funnily enough, not at all. I would say probably like 89 to 90% of the books I read, I'm a prolific reader, but they're almost all nonfiction. I'm really
nonfiction, really?
Nonfiction, yeah. I read fiction occasionally if I think it's like really good fiction that like, and I enjoy reading fiction, but I very rarely read romance novels. If I read fiction, it's generally like, denser stuff.
Right.
But my preferred genre is actually nonfiction. So this contest was a bit of a leap of faith for me.
But that is I'm a little mind blown that you don't read fiction very much, and then you just decided to pick up a pen one day and write out two amazing short stories. That doesn't seem fair. I find it so difficult.
It is really, I mean, I spent a long time on them, and I've also been writing for a long time, for years. So it's a lot of practice. But yeah, I get a lot of ideas for fiction from nonfiction because there's like a lot of ways of taking really interesting stuff in nonfiction and translating that into a story. And I think it makes it more accessible to people. And it's a really cool thing to do, and it's fun. So.
Oh, you are speaking my language. At the moment, I'm trying to figure out, kind of think about all the different ways that you can kind of do some science communication and communicate, big true concepts through the medium of storytelling. So
right.
We're on the same wavelength.
Definitely.
Yeah, how did you find out about the competition? Did you stumble across it, or have you been following?
It's basically a really simple answer. Over the summer, I was participated in a couple of Extinction Rebellion demonstrations and events and stuff like that. And I was still on their mailing list in the fall when I got this email about the competition. I was like, oh, I write, I might as well submit, So that's where that came from.
Yeah, that's cool. Is that the first time you heard about Solarpunk, or?
Yeah, I'd never heard about it, but I really love, like, it really aligns with my life philosophy, like that sort of optimistic, hopeful take on the world we could have. And I was like, wow, this seems so amazing. I have to try this.
Yeah, for sure. So you said you write, do you write stories or nonfiction just generally, or?
Yeah. I mean, I write nonfiction all the time, research papers, essays like about current events, about my personal stuff. But I also write fiction. I've been writing fiction since 6th grade and making up stories since I can remember, of course. But yeah, I love writing. Besides reading, it's probably my favorite thing to do ever.
Yeah, no, it's pretty good. And I think in general, people are becoming more familiar with the concept of you know, storytelling and fiction and stories just being able to be a universal language for people to talk about some of these really big
Yeah,
concepts. And like you say, Solarpunk is all about the hopeful and the optimistic. And yeah, if someone asked you to define it and what it meant to you, what would you
I would
say?
say that like solar punk is sort of, and this is a negative definition, but I think it's the truest, is sort of a rebellion against like the lazy cynicism that has cropped up a little bit around issues like climate change. And it's sort of a call to action of like, let's really imagine what a different world could look like. Let's not assume that what we have is the default and the only option. Like if we really take the innate good in the humanity and also the innate good of nature and the world around us, what kind of amazing creative thing can we create? And that's the mission of solar punk to me. And I really fell in love with it.
That's an amazing definition. I love that. I love that. Because it, you know, that's where the punk part of the name comes from, right? It has to
Yeah.
be a rebellion against something, right? That's what punk means. And you know, rebelling against this idea that this is just the way it has to be because it's the way it's been, and that, you know, capitalism and doom and gloom is the only way that things can be. And if we do rebel against that, then that's one step in the positive direction, I
Right,
reckon.
right.
The Extinction Rebellion protests that you took part in, what kind of protests were they? Were they
Well,
at your school or in your city
no,
or?
it was in New York City, yeah, which is why I sort of wasn't able to continue it once school started. I'm planning to go back this summer, but to get to New York City from where I live, it's a bit of a schlep, but I was willing to do it. And we did one event, like action in a park, where we handed out flyers to people, and we had this whole like we had a speaker, and you know we were doing art and just trying to engage people in conversations about climate change. And I did a couple of nonviolent direct action trainings with them. Um, I didn't have a chance to get involved as much as I would like to, just because school was starting, and you know it's a big schlep for me to get into New York City. But I'm definitely hoping to do more this summer, and especially once I go to college and move out on my own, I'm really planning to lean into more activism. And but I do a lot of also electoral activism just in my town, like knocking on doors for candidates and calling elected officials and stuff like that, registering people to vote. That's also something that I'm very involved in on a day-to-day basis.
Wow, I am I am impressed. You said you're 16?
Yes, I'm 16.
Well, I am very much impressed. That's amazing that you do so much good work, and I hope you do continue to write stories, because I think you really have a knack for them. The stories that, yeah, I think I reread them several times because they just put such a big smile on my face.
Oh,
Like,
that makes me so happy. I'm glad. That's my mission. I mean, like, I want to show people what we could have. And that's what I wanted to do. So I'm really glad that you feel that.
yeah, the second story, the City Starlight one, obviously the main reason that it was so heartwarming and wonderful is a major spoiler, so I won't say.
Well, okay,
um,
but you know it's going to happen in the beginning of the story. But yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason I made it a love story is because I want to show a world where it's easier to be happy, it's easier not to be so afraid, and it's easier to fall in love. And that's like part of what being hopeful means, and that's part of what building a hopeful world for young people means. And so that was definitely part of my goal.
yeah, no, I loved it. And it was actually, because I think the story was like 3 pages long or something, and you managed to tell like you painted a picture of the entire city, you told a love story, and you kind of like created this hopeful future in 3 pages, which I thought was really impressive.
Thank
um
you.
yeah, and I think my favorite line out of the whole thing was, holding her hand feels like how just baked cookies smell.
Yeah, I try to get creative with some of my metaphors.
I love that. It just
Thank
made
you.
me
I'm glad you
smile
like
so
them.
much. Oh my goodness. It was a very sweet
I
story.
definitely prefer happy stories and happy endings to sad ones because I don't know. I mean, and I think they're more powerful in a way because, the oil executives want us to be sitting there nihilistic, depressed, thinking, oh, there's no way out. There's nothing we can do, staying at home, doing nothing. Because when you think you can't do anything, then you don't do anything to change it. But if we can make an optimistic story that makes people smile, that makes people feel something, then that's really powerful. And once they have an image in their head of like the world they want to build, that there's no stopping that. And so stories that make you feel warm inside, that's what they can do. And they can really, unlike like a news headline, for example, or
They
nonfiction, they
don't
can
make
really
me feel
break
warm
through to
inside.
people.
No.
Exactly. And that's has to be the goal, I think, to really get people out of their chairs and into the street and changing things. And
Yeah,
optimism can do that in a way cynicism can't. So that's why I love stories like that.
Absolutely. I mean, you've convinced me. I'm ready to walk out the door and join a protest. So
Well, I'm glad.
you, I mean, this is kind of a general question, like how prevalent are themes like climate change and species loss and habitat loss and all of these things that obviously you were so passionately, interested in? How prevalent are they at school? Do you learn a lot about them? Are they kind of everywhere now?
To a degree. I think it's even less in the official curriculums and more in the way people feel in the world they can see around them. I mean, it's everyone talks about it because how can you not? Like, it's our practical reality. I mean, just for one example, when I was a kid, there would be every summer fireflies, like in the thousands, to the point they were like beautiful and you could see them. You could, if you just put a jar through the air, you could catch 10.
Oh my goodness.
And nowadays there's maybe 5, maybe 10 on a given night, usually none on any random summer night. And it's really sad. And the same thing is true of like frogs, crayfish. I used to use them as bait to go fishing. And they vanish, and people see that, like they're not blind. And so of course we talk about it because we can see it every day. And I think people talk a lot in the news and stuff about how angry my generation is about climate change and how we feel robbed. And that's true to a degree. But I think we don't talk about as much like the grief and the sadness. Like we're losing part of the whole interconnected world that we're a part of. And once that's gone, it's not coming back. Once species are extinct, they're extinct. And this great extinction is happening. And I think a lot of us feel sad more than anything, but we definitely talk about it. It's definitely on our minds.
Gosh, I mean, I hear and I talk about climate grief a lot, especially in kind of my like ecofiction circles and things. Climate grief is a major topic in a lot of stories that we're writing. But I haven't really heard from like teenagers or kids or like young adults about it, and that it's affecting them in their like teenage years. And it's inevitable because it is such a big part of our world now and how we live and everything, but it's still really sad.
Yeah, it is.
It's really sad.
The more we acknowledge that, the more we can turn that into change, and it's important to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Have you come across many, well, you said you don't read a lot of fiction stories, but I wonder how accessible stories that incorporate some of these topics are to kids who like go to their school library or something to find the language to talk about some of these topics.
I think that it depends. I mean, I have found some stuff like the Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson, I think, is a great book that talks about some of these issues. I read that a few months ago, and there are definitely other examples, maybe not top of mind, but and I also think that's, short stories are easier for people my age to digest also. And so that's something that's part of the reason I like writing short stories. The sad truth is, especially with smartphones, kids my age just don't read as much anymore. And it's not true of me, but it's definitely true of a lot of people. And so I think short stories are just more accessible in terms of they're more likely to read and understand one short story than like a whole giant book, but books are important too. And definitely people my age can understand it, and they're capable. We just have to put it into words and put it out there.
Yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting observation, that short stories are more accessible for 16-year-olds. Because thinking back to when I was 16, I don't think I read that many. I mean, I read the stories that teachers gave us in English class or whatever, but we were very much focused on books and not so much on short stories. That's a really interesting observation. So like,
I mean, maybe it's not true for everyone. I only live in a very small, part of the whole 16-year-old world.
But you can't be alone in feeling that way. And you're right that now with smartphones and all of these distractions, it's really difficult to sometimes just even like sit yourself down and focus on reading a book. Like even, probably half of my friends don't read very much because they just,
I know, it's really sad,
right?
But that's a whole separate issue.
That is a whole separate issue. But because Solarpunk is one of these genres that lends itself really well to short stories. Because,
I completely agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, because sometimes when you're writing the utopia, it's really difficult to write about conflict. And if you don't have conflict, then you don't have like a novel length story, right? So these like little snapshots, these positive snapshots of life, lend themselves so well to short stories. And I'm seeing so many more writing competitions and anthologies that are focused on short stories. I wonder if those kinds of anthologies would be well received in high schools, for example.
I think so. And I also think, it might be a challenge to write a utopia in a novel length, but I've read it before. That's happened. There's a great one called The Seep. I forget who it's by. And that's about, it's a utopian novel. And, there is sort of inner conflict in it, maybe not external conflict. It's a challenge, but it can be done. Maybe I'll challenge myself to do that someday.
Yes, the challenge has been the gauntlet has been thrown down.
Yes.
I would love to see what you do with a novel, with the space of a novel to create your stories. I love that. Where did the inspiration come from for the stories? Because I know you said you like writing really happy stories and stories that make people smile. But where did the inspirations for these two particular stories come from?
Well, this is sort of a long answer, so buckle your seat.
We've got
to go. But so one of my biggest interests that I read a lot about in nonfiction is urban planning. Like, how do cities work? How are they designed? What are the impacts on people's lives and on other species' lives? And I read like so many of those books from the library, and I have this notebook, and every time I came across like a really radical, really cutting edge, amazing, fascinating idea in an urban planning book, I would write it down, I would sketch it out. And over time, I started like accumulating all these ideas. And I'm like, I have to do something with this. So I turned it into this imaginary city of like, what if all of these amazing ideas were implemented? And what would that look like for people's lives living in this city? And so to me, the main character of the story, at least City Starlight, is really the city. And that's where my heart and soul poured into it, because, that was all those ideas from so long. And I tried to construct like the perfect, amazing city with all these different facets. So that's where the inspiration came from, like things like the sailboats powered by, the cargo sailboats, things like the wetlands around the city to protect from flooding, kayaking to work, monetizing carbon, the rooftop gardens where you could walk from one to one with bridges. Those were all urban planning ideas, the public transit. And as for, this more specifics, the bookshop where one of the main characters works, that is taken completely like whole cloth from a used bookshop near where my grandma lives that I have grown up near, and I love visiting it. And it's just such a charming, like beautiful place that it had to make a cameo in the story. The idea of like the holiday of turning all the lights out to see the stars, that just came up from like growing up in the suburbs, and I could never see the stars. It was because we live near New York City, there's too much light pollution. And it made me really sad and just like wishing, like, what if everybody just turned it off for one night and we could see the stars? And so I thought, that's a great metaphor for the collective action that can really change the world and like the beauty we can create through collective action. So I decided to sort of center the story around that. And the other story about the old growth forest, that just sort of came from like also urban planning, contemplating land use, right? Cemeteries is going to sound morbid, but there are a lot of land that is relatively unused. People don't generally visit them except, once a year, maybe maximum. And I don't know if it's different in Scotland, but that's definitely true in America. And so I'm thinking like, how could we make this both better for the grieving people and use it to, introduce some nature? Because nature enriches people's lives so much. And the more we can bring it into cities, the better I think those cities are going to be. And other inspiration for that story, it was basically just that crystallization of that idea, and I was thinking of the character of like, who would create such a thing? Like, who would that person be, and what would their life story be? And that's sort of how I came to that.
Well, that's lovely. Is the cemetery across the water from the city in City Starlight? Are they
that was the understanding. That was the
okay. I like it.
Universe,
there was just the one line in the cemetery where they look back at the sparkling city in the distance or something. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, that was the intention. And I mean, maybe I'll write more stories in that setting. I could create like a whole, thing of stories set there. But yeah, that was just a little thing thrown in. I'm glad you noticed it. That makes me happy.
Yeah, yes, please create more stories in this environment. I loved it. It was great. Yeah, it was really, that's amazing that you just have a folder full of urban planning ideas.
Yeah, that's what I want to do when I grow up. So,
I love it. That's so good. And it's true, like getting stories from getting story ideas from nonfiction and from what's happening around you. I mean, that's what everybody does. And that you read, that you check out urban planning books from the library and find stories in that. That's fascinating. I love that so much. It's so good. It's very different from what I was checking out at a library when I was 16. So you've talked about how much you like reading and writing. What kind of power do you think storytelling has? Do you think it's on the rise, using this form of communication to get people maybe on the same page, to get people off the fence and for certain topics?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean, I think as humans, storytelling is our biggest power. Like, obviously, since we evolved, that's what we've been doing. And that's how we communicate with each other. And that's how we pass on these big truths to each other. And I think storytelling is only going to get more powerful. As misinformation spreads and stuff like that, like stories are a great way to tell the truth. And I also think they are a great way to get people off the fence and convince them, because like stories have this emotional power of empathy and making you see a different world that a news headline can never have. News headline, rising emissions, everyone's just going to feel bad and then scroll past that. But if you can like really force someone to see like a picture of the different world we could have, that has so much more impact. And to me, that really has so much power, and we should be capitalizing on that so much. And I think another really important impact of stories in terms of getting people off the fence is like just showing them these alternatives. And especially for people who say, oh, we shouldn't sacrifice any human happiness to the environment. We should not be sacrificing anything to save the environment. I'm not going to believe in this science. Like, let's ignore this, right? If we can show them through a story that human happiness and environmental sustainability are not a trade-off, it's part and parcel of the same thing, and the things that make the people happy are the same things that tend to be good for the environment, maybe not for the CEO's bottom line, but for the people, right? That is so powerful, because it doesn't have to be this cynical, divided world of, us versus them versus, the environment. It's like, we can show them this world, and if we can paint that picture, that's so much more powerful than a news headline. That's so much more powerful than a Facebook post, and it really has a huge impact. And that's definitely part of what I want to do with my life, is write these stories and hopefully convince a few people.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, you've just put into words everything that I love about these kinds of stories. The solar punk movement, everything about it. I love it. Because that's part of the whole thing is, if you can't imagine a better future, how are we going to get there, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the most powerful person is someone who has a clear image of what they're trying to accomplish and the world they're trying to make. And it's and to show them that people can be happier in like a better world that's also better for the environment. It's not a loss of human happiness, it's a gain of freedom and happiness. And that's why I chose Falling in Love, because I think that's sort of representative of like the new freedom and happiness that we could have.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, like, this pops up a lot in the conversations around science fiction, and whether science drove science fiction or whether science fiction is driving science. Like, there's always this trade-off, right? Would we be, would our imagination and our ambition always be trained on the stars and space if not for science fiction? But also, would science fiction be what it is if we hadn't always had that ambition to see the stars, right? So they kind of drive each other. And then so maybe that can extend to other genres. I mean, a lot of solar punk is sci-fi. It's very speculative. It's focused on technology and new cultures, kind of. But it can extend into all kinds of other genres, that they just kind of, if we have this idea of what love might be like in a sustainable solar punk future, well, maybe it's gonna change the way that we feel about each other and about our environment now, and maybe we can kind of like have that snowball effect.
I hope so. Yeah, I definitely hope so. I also love sci-fi. I mean, if there's one genre of fiction I read the most, it's sci-fi. So I have so many recommendations for you at the end of the interview if you wanna hear them.
Oh, yes, please. Yes, please. You can definitely give some recommendations. I'm sure people watching would be also really excited to hear about them.
The most top of mind I can think of that sort of relates to solar punk is an author called Becky Chambers. I don't know if you've heard of her, but
I've heard the name. Yes.
Yeah, she writes science fiction, and one of her books I would definitely classify as solar punk, that's set on Earth, in like a future Earth, but it's very hopeful and it's very optimistic, and there are definitely conflicts, but it's just sort of about like, we have created this world and it's more of a utopia, and now what? And she puts such interesting characters in and such interesting technologies, and like it's some of the most interesting cutting edge new science fiction that is so different from the stuff that came before it, and also inspired by it, but so different, that I would highly, 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 highly recommend any of her books.
Okay, Becky
That's definitely
Chambers
one.
is going on my
Yeah,
TBRs. She's
yeah.
probably in there somewhere. I'm sure I've heard the name. I'm sure someone has recommended me Becky Chambers before, but now she's climbing the TBR list. Definitely. Any other recommendations that pop to mind?
Okay, I already said The Seep. That's one of the best utopian books I've read. And it's about a woman who's like a middle-aged woman, and the utopia has come. The aliens have come and given humans like so much happiness and technology. And it's not like that they're secretly evil. They really are trying to help humans, and they really have created a utopia. But she feels sort of left behind, like, oh, I miss the old flawed world, you know, and I don't know how to adjust to this world. And it's just like sort of a really sweet a portrait of her and how she grows and evolves in this new world. And it's one of the great Solarpunk books, in my opinion.
Very cool. The Seep.
What
I
are
don't
the
know
other?
if I've heard that.
I'm trying to think. Oh, I should have come more prepared for the book
No,
recommendations.
I totally putting you on the spot. That wasn't part of the prep question. So that's totally on me.
If I find more, I think of more, I'll email you.
Yeah, you email me and I'll put them in the description, and people can look in the description below for some more recommendations. Good. Yeah, that's totally fine. So how does it feel to be a winner of this competition and to have your stories published and to put them on the internet where everybody can read them?
I mean, nerve-wracking, definitely, but also really cool. Like, I put a lot of my heart and like my life philosophy into these stories, so it makes me feel so good that people like them. And yeah, I'm so happy about it. And it also makes me happy even that this competition is being held, because it means people are thinking about these same issues and really trying to move the ball forward on them, and like create this new cultural discourse in terms of fiction and its power and how we can use it. And that makes me, the happiest of all. That's the best thing about it.
Yeah, and I quite like that I didn't know that Extinction Rebellion had the Wordsmiths branch until they reached out to me, and until I saw this this storytelling showcase for Solarpunk. And I was really pleasantly surprised that they have it, because it almost like validated what I've been talking about, that storytelling had this kind of power. And definitely, normally people do associate Extinction Rebellion with activism and protests and things, which is what they do. And to see them acknowledge writing stories of this kind and imagining a positive future as a type of activism, I thought that was really cool. Yeah. And there's a whole conversation about there's so many different ways of being an activist, and not everybody is going to take to the streets. But if what you're good at, if it's writing Definitely. Stories, and if it's imagining better futures, then do that. And
that's what mutualism and cooperation is all about. Like, we need every type of person. You might be not the type to go into the streets. Great, write stories, or make paintings, or just talk to your friends about it, or there's so many amazing different ways you can get involved in it. And that's the great thing about cooperation. Like, we can have a million different types of people doing a million different types of things, and it's one movement to all succeed together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there might be, for people who aren't so involved in any kind of environmental movement, the term activism probably conjures an idea of what an activist should be. And so I think we all have that kind of preconception, but it's not actually accurate. Like, I've met so many different kinds of activists, and they all talk differently, and they all come from different places, and they all approach it in a different way. But if everybody does that, then we will get somewhere.
And part of that is also like coalition building with different types of activists in different issues. I mean, like, for me, definitely, I've interacted with like, gay rights activists, and their sort of idea of what the world should be, and then the environmental activists and their what the world should be, socialist activists and what the idea of their the Occupy movement, what their idea of the world should be. And like, each of those has their own sort of way of being and their own culture and their own plans. And if we combine that together, then we can really have an amazing coalition. And those different types of people you were talking about, that's how we get power, from combining difference.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. Well, I think that's all the questions I have for you today. I've so enjoyed talking to you about
So did I. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you so much for submitting your stories and sharing them with everybody. And I do hope that you continue to write, because I think
definitely will.
you do have skill and a talent for it. So and the way you talk is so inspiring and eloquent and
Thank
everything. If you
you.
can stick all of that into stories, I think you can, you can push a lot of people off that fence, I think.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much for having me on and interviewing me. And those are some really thoughtful questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to answer them. So
Great.
yeah.
Well, I'll let you go. And
Thank you
that's
so
all
much.
from me. And I'll see you next week, ecofictologists.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.